The moment I saw the HOA president steal a package off my porch with a clipboard in one hand and a tote bag in the other, I knew Paradise had a pest problem. Not a raccoon. Not a teenager. No, this was Cynthia Ralston, president of Briarwood Hills HOA, defender of lawn height, mailbox font, and now, apparently, my watercolor set. It wasn't her first grab. Third package that week. Same time, same walk, same bag. What she didn't know was someone else was watching her, too, and this time, the tote bag was walking straight into a federal case. Drop a comment and let us know where you're tuning in from. Front porch, recliner throne, or maybe hiding from your own HOA president. And hey, if you're into real stories with wild twists, poetic justice, and just the right dose of neighborhood drama, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Tomorrow's story? Even wilder. And the next twist coming? Let's just say, Cynthia won't be the last HOA queen to fall. 6 months ago, I moved here thinking I'd landed the American dream, suburb edition. Neighbors waving, dogs not barking, grass trimmed like a military haircut. I work from home. I draw storybook creatures for a living, and all I wanted was a quiet window and the occasional hummingbird. What I got instead was a letter on fake parchment paper with bold red ink. Mandatory compliance orientation, attendance required. No RSVP, no smiley face, just vibes. And a time, 7:00 p.m. sharp. You'd think they were launching a space shuttle, not briefing me on trash bin etiquette. I went, walked in with a notepad and hope, sat down on a folding chair that felt like a waiting room for judgment. There she was, Cynthia, megaphone hanging off her neck like a necklace from a dictator's Etsy shop, hair cut like she lost a bet, hoodie covered in HOA merit badges. She opened a 3-inch binder like she was reading sacred texts. Rule 1. All mailbox numbers must not exceed 2.5 inches. Rule 4. Packages must be retrieved within 2 hours of delivery. Rule 7. No surveillance equipment allowed, I asked. Politely, why cameras weren't permitted. Her smile collapsed. We have standards here, Mr. Bell, she snapped. Like my name was a bad smell. Creative types usually struggle with structure. That was the moment I became a target. I could feel it. The room went silent. My question was reasonable. Her response wasn't. It wasn't about cameras. It was about control. The next night, I caught her outside my house again. This time, she wasn't subtle. She stood at the edge of my driveway, staring at my mailbox, scribbling into her folder like she was grading me. No smile, no nod, just surveillance theater. At 8:15 a.m. the next morning, I got a violation email for mailbox digits approximately 3 millimeters too large. I measured them. Twice. Standard ruler. Exact compliance. Sent her photos. She replied, "Your defensive tone suggests ongoing hostility toward community harmony. I'll be observing your property," and copied the entire HOA board for good measure. That's when I knew this wasn't about aesthetics. This was about Cynthia staking a flag on my sanity. One petty citation at a time. A week later, she knocked over my trash can, documented the spill, then accused me of safety hazards. She was running a full campaign. Petty sabotage wrapped in policy. But what she didn't know was I had started documenting too. Not with clipboards and folders, with timestamps and photos, and eventually, a security camera. One she wouldn't see, because when someone starts building a case against your mailbox, you start building one back. And the last page in that case? It wouldn't be HOA paperwork, it would be federal. The violation came in like a summons from Mount Olympus. Your mailbox numbers exceed the 2.5-inch standard by approximately 3 millimeters. 3 millimeters. That's less than the width of an overcooked spaghetti noodle. I stood on my porch, ruler in one hand, HOA letter in the other, wondering if Cynthia owned a microscopic protractor or just eyeballed her petty tyranny like an overzealous mall cop. So I measured. Twice, then took photos from every angle with a ruler taped to the digits like I was prepping for a trial on CSI Suburbia. I emailed the photos thinking that would be the end of it, but no. Cynthia doubled down and CC'd the entire HOA board with a reply that read like a personality audit. Mr. Bell, your defensive tone suggests a deeper resistance to community harmony. Apparently, accurate measurements now counted as emotional aggression. That was the day I realized Cynthia didn't want compliance. She wanted surrender. And I wasn't planning on saluting just yet. 2 days later, I got a front-row seat to her next tactic. It was garbage day. I had placed my trash bin at the curb the night before, lined up precisely with my neighbors. I even checked it with a tape measure, because apparently that's who I'd become. At 7 a.m., I heard a crash, looked outside, and there she was, Cynthia, standing over my overturned trash can like she'd just defeated a wild animal in the street. Palers and peels scattered everywhere. She had the clipboard, she had the look, she even had the gall to wave at me like we were in a parade. Then she pointed at the mess and mouthed something that looked suspiciously like, "You're welcome." I stared at her, half awake, trying to process how garbage placement had turned into a political act. The neighbors started coming out one by one, watching me clean up like I'd been court-ordered to do penance for crimes against curb appeal. And Cynthia? She stood nearby, narrating her own righteousness like a documentary voiceover that no one asked for. That's when I knew I wasn't just living in a neighborhood. I was living in her stage play. I didn't argue. I took photos. Again, this time I documented my trash can's position the night before. Then I photographed the other cans up and down the block, all identical, all untouched. Mine? The lone casualty of what I now call the Tuesday morning debasement. I composed an email to the HOA board, respectfully stating that I believed Mrs. Ralston had not only overturned my trash bin, but also misrepresented the situation to create an artificial violation. I attached the photo evidence and kept my tone light, no sarcasm, no threats, just the facts, delivered with the calm precision of a man who was one HOA citation away from buying a flamethrower off Craigslist. And wouldn't you know it, they replied, not just privately, publicly. A formal reprimand was issued to Cynthia for lack of sufficient documentation prior to corrective action. For a brief moment, it felt like the clouds parted and HOA logic had entered the chat. But the best part? She was ordered to send an apology. Now, let me clarify. Cynthia's apology was not an apology, it was a literary performance. While my intentions were focused on maintaining community safety, I acknowledged that my documentation may have been incomplete. May have? It was like watching a surgeon refuse to admit they'd used a spoon instead of a scalpel. She didn't even mention me by name, just an incident involving a resident. But the tone, oh, the tone. It dripped with the sweet poison of someone who thought they were being gracious while still believing they were right. If passive aggression were an Olympic sport, Cynthia would have taken home gold, silver, and bronze. Still, it was progress, and for the first time since I moved to Briarwood Hills, I felt like I had landed a punch in this one-sided boxing match. But something told me Cynthia wasn't the type to lose and let it go, and sure enough, the air shifted, like the eye of a storm that paused just long enough to make you think it was over. That's the thing about people like Cynthia. They don't escalate with fists. They escalate with rules, quiet ones, vague ones, the kind that live in paragraph 6, subsection D, clause 8 of some dusty handbook she probably rewrote herself. I knew she wasn't done, and the more she smiled in public, the more I was convinced she was planning something behind the scenes. You don't just overturn a man's trash can and walk away unchanged. That's a declaration of HOA war, and I had a feeling my mailbox wouldn't be the last battleground. I started checking my porch like it was a crime scene, because next time I wouldn't just clean up, I'd collect. And if she thought her clipboard gave her power, well, I had a sketchbook and a grudge. Stay tuned. Before we roll into what Cynthia did next, and trust me, it involves a tote bag, a disappearing birthday gift, and a pattern no one saw coming, make sure you hit that subscribe button. If you've ever dealt with petty power, rulebook warfare, or a neighbor who thinks your mailbox is a national threat, you're going to want to stick around. The next part? Let's just say, the tote wasn't just for groceries. It started with a missing package, watercolor paints I'd ordered for a commissioned project. Tracking said it arrived at 2:47 p.m., complete with a photo of it on my welcome mat. By 5:00, it was gone. At first, I blamed the usual suspects, a glitch in the system, a distracted delivery driver, maybe even porch pirates with fast feet. But then the second one vanished. A birthday present for my nephew. Gone between the Amazon notification and me getting back from the store. That's when my inner illustrator turned into a reluctant investigator. If 2 is a coincidence and 3's a pattern, I was already staring at a full sketchbook of suspicion. What Cynthia called community oversight, I was starting to call opportunity. I reported it to the police. The officer barely looked up from his clipboard. Could be kids, happens all the time. You should consider getting a delivery box or have stuff shipped to your workplace. Right, because nothing says productivity like fielding crayons and plush dinosaurs at a Starbucks. I left the station with less hope and more questions. Why only my packages? Why only when Cynthia was on duty with her clipboard and her ever-expanding tote bag? I started jotting down delivery timestamps in my sketchbook. Then I began logging her walk times. And like a good plot twist, things started to align in a way that felt planned. Her routes, my missing boxes, her tote, which began her patrol looking like a folded beach towel, and returned swinging like it had groceries for a family of 8. Something smelled off. And it wasn't the HOA-mandated fertilizer. I started watching from my front window casually at first, then daily, then obsessively. Cynthia passed every house like she was on parade. But she didn't spend the same time everywhere. No, she lingered at porches where packages had been delivered. She'd lean in, glance around like a raccoon pretending to check for noise ordinances, and then move on. Unless, of course, the porch was mine. On my property, she'd pause, scribble peek, sometimes even adjust her tote before waddling off like nothing happened. Her clipboard said compliance, but her eyes said clearance sale. It was starting to look less like a patrol and more like shopping with plausible deniability. One afternoon, I timed it perfectly. I caught her at my mailbox just after a FedEx truck left a package at my neighbor's. "Afternoon, Cynthia," I said with a smile that meant, "I'm watching you," without saying, "I'm watching you." She jumped just slightly, then smoothed her expression like it was part of the uniform. "Just doing my rounds. Safety first." I pointed toward the porch down the street. "You're really consistent about checking the houses right after deliveries. That's commitment." Her smile froze just a hair too long. "Some residents aren't securing their items. It creates liability issues for the whole block." A textbook non-denial. She didn't deny being there. She didn't deny noticing, she simply blamed the victims. For leaving that's when it hit me. She wasn't just brushing close to the line, she was using her authority to erase it entirely. She wasn't stealing out of desperation, she was justifying it. Community trust, safety, harmony, those weren't values to Cynthia, they were cover stories. And her tote? That wasn't a purse. That was a magician's hat. Packages went in, accountability never came out. I stood there, listening to her spout solutions like delivery lockers and porch protocols with the same tone you use when offering a cough drop to someone you just sneezed on. She was giving advice to avoid the exact problem she was creating, and doing it with the confidence of someone who believed the clipboard made her untouchable. But the more she talked, the clearer it became this wasn't just a neighborhood quirk. It was a system. And the system had a queen. What she didn't know? I had started building a kingdom of evidence. And soon, the crown was going to shift. It's amazing what you'll justify when someone keeps stealing from you in broad daylight and smiling like it's community service. I knew installing a security camera technically violated the HOA's sacred scroll of aesthetic harmony, but by the time my third package vanished, my patience was officially under eviction. Cynthia Ralston had become a recurring shadow in my life, the kind that shows up uninvited and thinks being nosy is the same thing as being helpful. I figured if she was going to act like my porch was public property, I was going to treat it like a federal crime scene. So I installed a discreet little doorbell camera, tucked it behind a flower basket, and prayed no one measured the angle of its placement. It felt like breaking curfew in a town run by clipboard monarchs, but some lines are worth crossing when your art supplies keep disappearing like socks in a dryer. I didn't have to wait long. 3 days later, I ordered the same watercolor set that had previously vanished and made sure I wasn't home during her afternoon walk. The delivery came at 2:43 p.m. At 2:56, Cynthia arrived, and this time I wasn't guessing. I had her in high definition, strolling up to my porch like it was checkout lane 5, glancing over her shoulder, adjusting her tote bag with the same focus surgeons use before making a first incision, and then, scoop, she examined the label, paused like she was estimating resale value, and slid it into her bag so smooth you'd think it was pre-wrapped for her. The casualness, the confidence, the ritual, it didn't look like her first time. It looked like her 50th. That video wasn't just proof. It was a confession, performed by someone who didn't even think she was doing anything wrong. That's what scared me most. Now, I could have taken the videos straight to the HOA board, but Cynthia had already taught me how that playbook ended. She'd twist it, deny it, and somehow make me the villain for recording community interactions. So instead, I invited her over. Told her I had a concern about porch security and that I wanted her HOA wisdom on the matter. She showed up 10 minutes later, clipboard in hand, like she was ready to write me up for breathing too loud. "What can I help you with, Mr. Bell?" she said, sweet as spoiled tea. I smiled, pulled out my phone, and hit play. Her face went through all 5 stages of panic in less than 10 seconds. When it finished, she didn't even try to lie. She pivoted straight to indignation. "You're violating HOA policy. That's illegal surveillance. I'm calling the police." She made good on her threat, called them right from my front steps like she was dialing in an airstrike. When the officer arrived, she met him with the tone of someone who was both victim and hero in a war no one else had asked for. "He's filming me without consent. This is a clear breach of HOA policy and personal privacy." The officer looked bored before she even finished the sentence. Then he turned to me and asked calmly, "Do you have the footage?" I handed him my phone. He watched it, rewound, watched it again, and then he looked up and said, "You're not the first." Just like that. 5 words that shifted the whole atmosphere. I blinked. "Excuse me? You're not the first one to report this kind of thing," he said. "In fact, there's already a federal agent assigned to this neighborhood. He's been watching." Cynthia flinched. Later that evening, I met Agent Howard Reese. He didn't wear a badge on his chest. He wore it in his posture. Everything about him said quiet confidence, the kind you earn after 20 years of seeing suburban drama taken too far. He walked into my living room like he'd already been there in spirit. "Mr. Bell," he said, "I'm with the United States Postal Inspection Service. Mind if I sit?" I didn't. He opened a thick folder and showed me printouts, victim statements, photographs, a map with pins in 3 neighborhoods, all radiating outward from Briarwood Hills. "Your neighbor Cynthia has come up in multiple reports," he said flatly. "You're the first to give us video. That helps a lot." He wasn't joking. This wasn't just my story anymore. It was a chapter in a case. I was no longer the quiet artist fighting HOA nonsense. I was the reluctant lead witness in a federal mail theft investigation. I showed him everything I had, time limits, notes, footage. He nodded, like he'd already guessed most of it and was just waiting for the puzzle piece to snap in. "We've suspected organized theft. The pattern fits. She's targeting packages, especially small valuable ones with resale potential. Electronics, tools, art supplies, no big furniture. Nothing trackable, just enough to make it disappear without raising alarms. Until now." He closed the folder, looked me square in the eye, and said, "Would you be willing to help us catch her in the act one more time?" I said yes before he finished the sentence, because nothing fuels cooperation like the chance to watch your worst neighbor get legally cornered by someone with federal clearance. The thing is, Cynthia had spent months watching me, writing notes, sending warnings, treating me like I was the problem. But all I'd done was open a box she'd been sealing shut with rules and red ink. And now, the clipboard queen was about to learn what happens when you play dictator in a neighborhood filled with doorbell cameras and federal surveillance. Her megaphone might have worked on the block, but in front of the law, she was just another thief with a tote bag. Next stop, the sting. The morning after Cynthia saw the camera footage and realized her empire had a crack, I found a handwritten sign taped to my front door. No envelope, no HOA letterhead, just a shaky Sharpie message on ruled paper. Smile. You're being watched and tracked. It wasn't signed, but I didn't need handwriting analysis to know who wrote it. The passive-aggressive tone was vintage Cynthia, equal parts threat and theater. I stared at the note, imagining her crafting it in her kitchen, muttering about community standards while chewing on the cap. It was the kind of message you leave when you're trying to intimidate someone but can't legally call it a threat, the kind of thing a person writes when they're starting to lose control of the plot. I didn't take it personally. I took it as confirmation. Her mask was slipping. Agent Reese didn't flinch when I showed him the note. "She's spiraling," he said, flipping it into a plastic sleeve like it was evidence from a crime scene, which, technically, it was. People like this, they escalate when they feel cornered. Let's move forward. And move forward we did. That afternoon, a decoy package arrived on my porch. Nondescript box, high-end electronics label, GPS tag sealed inside like a tracking chip in a spy movie. My job? Pretend nothing had changed. No suspicious glances, no pacing in the driveway, just a regular Thursday in the neighborhood where everything was about to get weird. I went about my day like any good bait, playing it cool while federal agents sat in unmarked cars down the block, waiting for Queen Cynthia to make her move. But that afternoon, she didn't show. 3 o'clock passed, then 4. By 5, the box was still there, untouched. It was like waiting for a storm that refused to rain. I started wondering if she'd finally spoke to herself. Maybe the note was her version of retreat, her way of saying, "I'm watching you, but I know you're watching me." Or maybe she was buying time, recalculating. Either way, by 10:00 p.m., I was convinced the day was a bust. I made some tea, skimmed a book, tried to talk myself down from the adrenaline cliff. And just as I was settling in, I heard it. Footsteps on the porch. Not rushed, not random. Slow, deliberate. The kind of steps you take when you're trying not to be heard, but you want to be sure no one's watching. I froze, then crept to the hallway, peeking through the side window. There she was. Cynthia. In the dark. Flashlight in one hand, something in the other. Her movements were twitchy, methodical. She scanned my porch like she expected to find a trap door. Then she disappeared out of view, and I heard my door handle rattle. Next thing I knew, she was inside. Not metaphorically, literally inside my house, whispering to herself like she was narrating a documentary that only she could hear. "Where is it? Where's the ledger? He's hiding it. I know it's here." I stayed hidden for a second just to process what I was witnessing. She tiptoed around my living room, shining her flashlight on my art supplies like they were contraband, picked up brushes, snapped photos. At one point, she actually said nobody needs this many watercolors unless they're laundering money. She wasn't cracking under pressure, she was snapping like a breadstick in a bear trap. Her eyes darted, her voice mumbled half-sentences about forged invoices and community corruption. She wasn't just trying to cover her tracks anymore. She was rewriting the plot, casting herself as the hero, busting a criminal mastermind. And I apparently was the kingpin of Crayola cartel. That's when I stepped out and flipped the lights on. She dropped her phone like it was evidence. Because it was. And spun around, caught mid-delusion. "You think I'm crazy, but I know what you're doing," she barked. "You've been selling through that sketchbook cover business. Don't play innocent." I stared at her, trying to decide whether to laugh or reach for my phone. "You broke into my house because you think I'm laundering art money?" She nodded with the confidence of someone who'd cracked a national conspiracy using nothing but paranoia and a highlighter. She clutched one of my paintbrushes like it was a smoking gun. "You think you're clever. she hissed. "But I've been building a case on you since you moved in." Then, as fast as she came, she ran. Out the back door, into the dark, leaving a trail of broken delusion and fingerprints behind. Agent Reese called me within minutes. "She took the decoy package," he said calmly. "GPS shows it's at her residence. We're preparing a warrant now." He didn't sound surprised. He sounded ready. Cynthia had finally crossed every line she'd drawn for everyone else. She'd broken in, stolen federal bait, and confirmed without a doubt that her HOA kingdom wasn't about rules. It was about power. And now the Queen of Clipboards was about to get a taste of someone else's order, the real kind with cuffs. At exactly 6:00 a.m., Briarwood Hills got its wake-up call. And this time, it wasn't Cynthia measuring lawns with a flashlight. It was a fleet of unmarked cars, federal agents in navy jackets, and the unmistakable rhythm of justice knocking. Hard. I stood at my window with a mug of coffee and a front-row seat to the unraveling. Cynthia Ralston was escorted out of her house wearing a faded lavender bathrobe, bedhead bob, and, true to brand, still pinned with 6 HOA merit badges like suburban war medals. She didn't look like the neighborhood authority anymore. She looked like a cautionary tale. The irony? She tried to control every inch of Briarwood Hills, but couldn't control her own front porch when the feds showed up. That's the thing about power built on paper. It burns fast. The real surprise came when they opened her garage. I expected chaos, maybe a few stolen items tucked in corners. What I didn't expect was a retail theft empire. Shelving units lined the walls, each one labeled by product category: electronics, tools, small appliances, toys. There was a photography station with a ring light and backdrops for listing photos. Shipping labels, bubble wrap, a whiteboard calendar marked with delivery prime times. The woman who once fined me for leaving my trash can 3 inches off center had been running a porch piracy operation that made eBay look underfunded. Agent Reese looked over the setup like a professor grading a thesis. "She's been at this for over a year. Multiple neighborhoods, total estimated value, over $25,000. 0 cents. I glanced at one shelf and spotted the watercolor set I'd replaced 3 times. Nothing hits like seeing your own stolen art supplies cataloged under mid-range resale. The neighborhood gathered, slowly at first, like deer sniffing the edge of a storm. Then, all at once, pajamas, coffee mugs, cell phones. People whispered, pointed, recorded. The same neighbors who once averted their eyes during Cynthia's sidewalk inspections were now filming her perp walk like it was a 4th of July parade. Kids asked their parents why the clipboard lady was getting handcuffed. One man spotted his missing golf clubs being pulled from a pile of sporting goods. Another recognized Christmas presents from last year, still gift-wrapped. It was surreal. Cynthia had spent months convincing people that lawn color and mailbox size defined harmony, all while robbing them blind under the protection of bylaws. And now, the mask was gone, and so was her control. She ruled like a suburban queen, but when justice came, it wore gloves, badges, and had a search warrant. In the weeks that followed, Briarwood Hills didn't just recover, it transformed. The HOA board, stunned and embarrassed, opened emergency elections. I didn't campaign, but somehow I was elected HOA president. Unanimously. Apparently, catching a felon mid-MacPack theft earns you some street cred. My first act, we shredded the community compliance manual and rewrote it from scratch. No more surveillance bans, no more trash can geometry. We focused on things that actually mattered: safety, neighbor support, and not treating lawn height like a personality trait. For the first time, people started chatting at the mailbox, waving from their porches, offering help instead of side eyes. Kids played in front yards without being reported. It was almost like we'd all been holding our breath, and finally someone opened a window. As for Cynthia, she pled guilty to multiple federal charges: mail theft, wire fraud, breaking and entering, and organized retail crime. Her sentence? 30 months in federal prison, plus $78,000, 0 cents, in restitution to her victims. I got a formal letter from her attorney, typed, cold, and very not handwritten, acknowledging my cooperative role in a federal investigation. No apology, of course, just legal closure. But I didn't need a letter to feel like the chapter was closed. Her house went up for sale, her clipboard legacy dissolved into legend, and the HOA meetings? Now held over barbecue, not folding chairs. We even started a neighborhood watch, one that watches out for people, not to report them, because we'd learned the hard way. Rules without humanity aren't order, they're oppression in a sweater vest. So to every HOA Karen out there thinking they can weaponize bylaws and steal under the cover of community standards, let me offer this. The next package you swipe might not hold bath bombs or blender parts. It might hold a GPS tracker, a federal sting, and a one-way ride to a courtroom where your clipboard carries no weight, because the quiet neighbor you've been harassing might just be the one holding the evidence. And if you're watching this and thinking, that would never happen in my neighborhood, congratulations! You've just discovered the first red flag. Thanks for watching, and if you love real stories where justice shows up early and uninvited, hit that subscribe button, because in this neighborhood, we return packages and we return fire. In the end, I didn't just get my packages back, I got my neighborhood back. What started as quiet frustration turned into a loud reminder. Sometimes the most dangerous people don't wear ski masks. They wear name tags and hand out newsletters. Cynthia taught me that power without accountability isn't leadership. It's a costume. But truth has its own timing, and when it arrives, it doesn't knock. It enters with a badge and a folder full of facts. If this story taught us anything, it's that speaking up matters, documentation matters, and when the system is used to harm, it can also be used to heal. So, if you've ever felt bullied by the people who claim to keep order or dismissed for raising your voice, remember, you're not alone. And your voice might just be the thing that starts a chain. If you found this story satisfying, surprising, or just a little too real, hit that like button so we know it resonated. Leave a comment below, tell us where you're watching from, or share your own HOA horror story. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel, because next week's story, let's just say the clipboard gets replaced by a courtroom gavel. And trust me, you won't want to miss what happens when karma calls with receipts.